What's happening, Packer fans? Welcome back to an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. I'm joined once again by Packers great, former offensive guard Mike Wahle. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Wahle68. Mike, before we even jump in, I just want to say a huge thank you. We have been doing this, I don't know how long now, but the comments every single week on your episodes are amazing. I know Packer fans are super appreciative that you take the time to do this every week. I constantly get messages and comments about how much they learn from you doing this. So I just wanted to take a second to say thank you. I appreciate it. I always learn something, and it's just always great to have you on. So thank you so much.
Andy, it's fun talking ball with you. I appreciate you having me on. It's a good time. So there's reciprocating the thank you.
I appreciate that. Let's kick things off, actually, before we jump into kind of our main topics. Some good news on Thursday. Jaire Alexander was back practicing in some capacity. This is why I don't make big bets on things, Mike, because just yesterday on the episode, I said, based on how he was at practice and just kind of off of the bike and everything and not really seeming super ready to go, I don't think he's going to go this week. And then, of course, Thursday he practices, but that's clearly some huge news for Green Bay, specifically with potentially Keenan Allen and friends coming to town. I know Allen was on the injury report on Wednesday for the Chargers, but either way, if they do in fact get Jaire back, would be huge news for Green Bay.
Yeah, and then it'll be interesting how they use him. Listen, Jaire Alexander or not, if you go man coverage against Keenan Allen, you're just asking for trouble. So is it in if he's perfectly healthy, is that a matchup you want to take? If I'm a Packer fan, I want to say yes, because there's just some certain things you have to do against Justin Herbert to be successful. And for us, it's going to probably involve bringing more people than they have. But if you leave that guy one-on-one, or the same thing goes with Austin Eckler, there's some real matchup problems. This reminds me of the old Chargers teams of the 2000s that had incredible talent everywhere, and they never could get over the hump. There's no reason this team should be bad. And especially on defense, defensive head coach, they're last in the league, and it's nuts. But having said all that, Jaire Alexander's being back is great because he's one of the best players on your team. I still don't know what that means as far as how to structure a passing defense against specifically Keenan Allen, but really all three of those guys plus Austin Eckler.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a huge key to this week, and how they stop those, I have no idea. Can there be a point, Mike, where the NFL just kind of figures out a specific system? And I know a lot of teams are running similar stuff and using some similar things that Staley and Fangio and Barry and the Rams and everyone else are using, but it does seem like that sort of system isn't having the same effect that it had in previous seasons. To me, it kind of feels like the NFL has figured it out a little bit. Can that happen, or is it just happenstance? Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two things that are happening in my opinion. One, some play callers evolve and some don't, or some people evolve their play calling or scheme to the individuals they have and some do not. Right. So you go back to the 3-4 defense with Bill Belichick, being able to grab up all the defensive ends that nobody knew what to do with, and then just making use out of Mike Vrabels of the world. I mean, just doing something that was a little bit different, unique, but getting really large, good athletes on the field, and then trying to figure things out from a secondary standpoint, and having multiple coverages, multiple looks, be comfortable dropping 9 at some points, right? So always evolving was kind of the theme of the day back then. Now you see a lot of these guys, and we're seeing it right now. Kyle Shanahan is kind of the father of this. I guess his dad is, but the father of this tree. But really, when you start thinking about who got hired and why, Sean McVay is the reason that most of these guys got hired, right? Including probably the Green Bay's coach. Yep. And what you start to see is the masters, the best guys know how to, offensively or defensively, know how to tweak, utilize, change, be like Bruce Lee, be water, be fluid, depending on who you have in your locker room. And then some of these guys don't. So I think there's a part of it where it's if you put me in front of a computer long enough, I can beat your system. But there's also another part of it, some guys are being successful despite running an old school system because their guys execute better because they know who they've got and what they need to be successful. I think that's where the chasm is right now, is the application of process, not necessarily process.
We talked about in the past of how you can have a new head coach that was hired from their previous regime. And a lot of times it's based on successful offense or defense that has a generational player on it. Aaron Donald, generational player with the Rams when Brandon Staley was there. And all of a sudden he gets to the Chargers and is trying to run a defense. Now they have some really good players on that defense as well. But I think it's always a cautionary tale of, all right, was the defense that great, or was Aaron Donald that amazing? And we'll see what it amounts to and if Staley can kind of swing things around the season. But his tenure with the Chargers has not gone great. And I'm with you. I think it's a much better team than what their record shows so far.
So you look at the, they're obviously the firing in Las Vegas, but now Frank Reich and another subject, but oh my God, we're taking over the play calling again. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Frank Reich and then Staley, the hottest seats in town right now. And you look at it, when you watch the tape of the Chargers, and the thing that happens in LA, because they're not really Chargers fans. So guys are like, they're watching the last two games. They're playing like the Jets and the Bears that are terrible. They go, oh man, our defense is really coming around. And then they play the Lions, who's a good team.
Yeah.
And I'm not at all overblowing this when I say that is one of the worst defensive tapes that I've seen in years. I mean, and it's not just that every level of defense is getting beat physically. It's that they're doing so many, like they don't rotate their safeties fast enough. They play off the way they play coverage is bad. The way they fit in, the leverage stuff. Everyone's talking about the 2 and 3 man lines with the Green Bay. It's like that's not the problem. The problem is the alignment. They're aligning outside nasty formations. They can't get to the backside. It's like all of this stuff is it's easy to look in retrospect and hindsight, but that was one of the worst films I've ever seen. That's not one of the worst films I've seen in the last 5 years. It was awful defensively.
You posted those couple clips of the defensive tackle just getting blown like 10, 15 yards off the ball. Like that is, you don't see that very often where guys that like he was basically by the safeties by the time that play was over.
You got to buy a ticket to take a ride like that, man. That was terrible.
Seriously.
And it wasn't that I had 3. I could have had more.
Yeah, that was something. I'm looking forward to jumping into that tape later this week, and hopefully it's things that Green Bay can take advantage of. We're all the way off script already, which is fantastic because that's usually our best stuff anyway. But you did bring up the 2 down linemen and the semantics thing that Matt LaFleur brought up. I don't know how much we need to get into this. It's probably been a little bit overblown already. I went on a tangent out about it yesterday, but just your overarching thoughts on Matt LaFleur's comments and what you took away from it.
What I honestly took away from it is that you just see a guy who's really frustrated. And in one sense of it, to be fair, I completely understand why he is, he's probably sitting at the thing on, I'm trying to beat the Chargers, and I got to tell these guys who get to watch our tape but have really don't have a good, that it's not they don't have any idea, but they don't have a great idea of what they're looking at. And I have to talk about the difference between number 52 putting his hand in the ground and not, and now we're going to call it, I mean, it's asinine because that whole thing it's an alignment issue. If you align your guys wide, like in other words, you're not going to run a 6'2" Mau deep goal line defense in that situation.
Right.
That's a whole different conversation. But if you're going to put, Preston Smith is 275 pounds. Rashan Gary, they are defensive ends. We call them edges because they stand up, and we wanted a new thing. But that's all they are. If they put their hand on the ground, there's no difference. The problem is if you align outside nasty formations, if you align outside the second tight end on a hipped outlook, you cannot make the backside play. Blah blah blah. There's a lot of like leverage issues that play into that system, and so teams are exploiting it. The Chargers got exploited on it. I just put a tape up on our program this past week. So every team has these issues, and it's unfortunate that we're in this situation where the head coach feels like he has to take somebody to task for asking. To be fair, is not a very good question, but it's just part of the deal. It just seemed a little bit at this stage. You got. I think Aaron Jones not got thrown under the bus, but he's kind of like calling out Aaron for some mistakes that he made. There's some things going on right now where you go, oh, this is a different version. This isn't the 13-3 Coach LaFleur. This is different. And we've always, you always talk about how is a guy going to be when things are going bad? How's the leadership what's that going to look like? And maybe you're seeing a snippet of that. I don't know.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it is interesting to me. Matt, for the first 4.5 years, basically, every single time anything went wrong, it was immediately, I got to be better. That's on me. I got to put my guys in better positions to succeed. over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And that plays pretty well when you're 13-3 and you're like, oh, okay, he's taking accountability and responsibility, covering for his guys. That's great. And so on and so forth. These past couple weeks were really the first time where I've seen him, as you mentioned, I don't know if we want to say throw under the bus, but the Aaron Jones comments about him not getting out of bounds. He tiptoed a little bit about Jordan throwing the interception, but for the first time was kind of like, yeah, it needed to go to the backside and we can't have a turnover in that situation.
He talked about on the pump, Omaha pump or the chair route.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like, and the chair route's not good. It's like, so I don't want to cut you off, but
no, go.
Like, here's how this is supposed to work. Okay. You go into film and you're like, hey, Christian, you can't run that shitty route and expect us to throw you the football. And here's why. And if you don't know that, because that's a high school route. Okay. So, and here's why, Jordan, this is what, and then you go out into the media and you go, on me, we didn't coach that right all day, because you don't say anything else. Like, sorry, it that really doesn't sit well, because usually what starts happening is you look over at Frank Reich right now. Thomas Brown becomes a coordinator after like 1 or 2 games. He's like, no, I'm going to take this back. This is what's best. It's like rats jumping off a sinking ship, man. It becomes a bad look.
No, and that was another one, calling out Watson for the route. He called out the basically in run defense. He multiple times said our players need to do a better job tackling, and we were not in the right gaps and everything. Like this is the first time I can ever remember where it was all out. Like, no, it was on the players this time, which is it's just an interesting juxtaposition to what he's done throughout the entire rest of his career. And I think that is noteworthy one way or the other. And we'll see, maybe it's more accountability and maybe the players will react to it and it'll be great. Or it could swing in the other direction too. Either way. And obviously I'm hoping that it turns out better, but it is just interesting to see the change in dynamic, and we'll see now how they respond to it this week.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, if a coach is, listen, we just want you to be the same guy, just be consistent. I'm talking about if I'm in the locker room right now.
Yeah.
If you're a guy that goes, hey, we dropped a pass, cost us a game, or, you just call things how it is. Like, I don't think anybody, I hope that we're not society-wise, but I hope we're past the point in locker rooms and build up trust and you work together, you bleed together, all those things. So you build this relationship where it's like, yeah, I screwed that up. Like, just go ahead and put it on me, man. We don't have to tiptoe around. Everybody, it was obvious that this person made a mistake. We'll just call it what it is and move on. But if you're constantly trying to be the good guy and like, oh, no, and now you're turning, that part of the game right now is not sitting right with players, where it would have been fine if you would have been the same guy for the last 3.5 years.
No, that's really interesting, and I don't disagree in any way, shape, or form. All right, any other key takeaways from Packers Steelers? Obviously, the run defense wasn't good enough. Pass offense got going a little bit. Run offense, not great, but did have the nice big explosive to A.J. Dillon.
Yeah.
Anything that caught your eye that you want to go over this week?
Yeah, Steelers are a much more physical football team. They've got a culture that resonates throughout their locker room and organization. Mike Tomlin's done a great job there for years, and that's the reason he's one of the longest tenured head coaches. I thought their defense came to play from we're going to physically beat you on the line of scrimmage. I know we had a 40-yard run, but otherwise we're averaging about 3.1 yards per carry, right? It's not very good. And we're getting physically dominated in multiple occasions from a team, quite frankly, that is missing arguably their best player, second best player, Micah Fitzpatrick. In the passing game, look, the thing is right now, you have a quarterback who's going to his 4th year. He's a first-year starter. You're trying to figure out he's the long-term answer. And he makes, you don't have 32 good quarterbacks in the National Football League.
Right.
So there's that consideration. But he can make some throws, and everyone goes, oh, it was a great throw. There's college quarterbacks that can make good throws. The difference in this sport is 2 things. Can you make the easy throws, which is not a gimme right now? And can you process information at an elite level? Pre-snap and post-snap, can you process information? And you still have however many games there's left. I think you still have to prove that if you're Jordan Love. Those 2 things are what makes I mean, I said this on another show yesterday. It's like, what is Brock Purdy doing better than Jordan Love? It's like, well, he processes information at a much higher level, right? And I don't know if it's coaching. Yep. I don't know if it's him, it's development. We don't know those answers. We can just tell what we see on tape. But from a pre-snap and post-snap processing, there's a lag between him and some of the elite guys. And then, man, you got to throw flat routes. Like they got to be 19 out of 20, 99 out of 100. You got to throw the gimmies. You got to make them.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I talked to Sam Monson from PFF yesterday, and it was a very, very similar conversation. A lot of the same things that you just mentioned. Dan Orlovsky also on the Pat McAfee show saying something similar of there's some great throws that you see from Jordan, but there's not enough good throws from Jordan. I think there's a level of that is there as well. I do think that the layups need to be a little bit better from my standpoint. I see enough of the flash here and there that I'm okay with the wow play here there. It does need to be the layups and the consistency. The little play to Jaden Reed where it's a bubble screen and the ball is like 3 yards behind Jaden and he has to adjust to it and then turn around and get upfield. As you're mentioning, that needs to be like 99.9% of the time you throw it a little bit ahead of him so he can accelerate forward and make it a little bit easier for him. And there were some other plays in this game where I thought, if there's a couple of plays where guys got to do barrel rolls because they have to go to the ground to catch the ball and then kind of roll for a first down or roll for extra yards. If you hit those guys in stride, they can get upfield and it becomes a better explosive play. And it just allows everything to come a little bit easier. I'm in the same place with Jordan. I'm still in the spot where I want to see more. And I'm really interested to see the remainder of this season to see if we can see progress, if some of the stuff starts to slow down for him a little bit, or if this just is who he is. Is that kind of where you're at too with Jordan, or how are you kind of feeling after 10 weeks or 10 games? 10 weeks, sorry.
I don't really, I don't have a dog in the fight. I guess the way I look at it, I have been around quarterbacks that you call 2 tenure quarterbacks. And that means that the owner, the Mark Murphy, the general manager, whoever's in charge decides that there's not another guy that we're going to pick up that's better than him, but this isn't the staff to develop him. I've been around that, Ryan Tannehill, before he went to the Titans, got that big contract and played well. He got a big contract in Miami, but he went through 3 staffs.
Yeah.
The thing, those are real deals, right? And you call those quarterbacks multi-tenure quarterbacks, and you're talking about the coaching staff. So I think right now you see that there's a little bit of, passive aggressive behavior at the media from the coach. Everybody's kind of trying to figure this thing out. And you see the inconsistency from the quarterback, and obviously the 5th-year option is coming up, and you start going. I certainly don't think that this Coach LaFleur in particular is in trouble as far as the job goes. But I do find that I could build a very easy narrative. Like, is he the right guy to develop, or does he have the staff, I should say, to develop this particular player? And if not, I think those are the questions that need to be answered. Do you need to get a different staff in there to develop the talent you have in the rooms? Because first-year quarterback, 4th-year guy going to his 5th year, going to pay him an absolute, Noah's Ark full of money. Then you got first-year wide receivers in a room with no mentorship. You got second-year tight ends in a room with no mentorship. You've got at this point now, a relatively young offensive line with Bakhtiari not in the game. You've got it right. You lost Rasul Douglas as far as a leader and the glue guy in the DB room. You're looking around this team, and they decided to develop talent without mentors. And I don't know how you do that in the National Football League. I think if you would have asked me, I think you did ask me at the beginning of the season, what's the biggest pain point here? It's that you don't have player leadership in this locker room and enough rooms in the building. So I think you're seeing that a lot right now. And then it becomes a question of, if you're not going to have that, who are the people developing talent?
Yeah, it's so interesting because Matt has said in the past that he wants this to be a player-led team. I haven't heard that much this year. I heard it a lot in previous years. I've always been super complimentary of the Packers of always having, if you go back the past few seasons, we don't need to name every single one, but every position group had a veteran leader in it, every single position group. I'm not talking like one was missing. It was every single one where there was a 4 or 5, 6 year or beyond, your Mercedes Lewis's, your Bakhtiaris, your Rodgers, your Joneses, your Clarks, etc. There's every single one of those in every single room. And then it was interesting to me where, and this is probably where there's a disconnect between coaching and GM, where the GM is like, I just want to get as many young guys so they can grow together and we can see who fits and who doesn't. And I'm sure from a coaching standpoint, you're like, yeah, but I would love a Mercedes Lewis and some of those guys to be able to mentor some of these younger guys. But I'm with you. It is interesting that this is the year of all years that you really don't have any of those guys, at least not many left that can mentor some of those younger players.
Yeah, you know what? So I'm not saying this is the case with Green Bay, but this is the case with some teams in the National Football League. The situation that you're in right now is that circular argument between personnel and coaching, where personnel guys are going, hey, if you had an owner to answer to, you would be like, well, wait a second, we're looking for the future. That's why we got rid of Mercedes and Lazard and Cobb and Rasul Douglas. So, hey, my hands are clean. I got another 2 years to show you that these guys work. And if you're the coach, you're going to management and you're going, well, he just got rid of Rasul. He just, Mercedes, we don't have any mental, we don't have any of our leadership. So you got to give me 2 years and my hands are clean right now. We got to build this thing out. And so it's like you're buying time by doing this, right? So I'm very cynical with some of this stuff because these moves, quite frankly, they haven't made sense since February and they don't make sense now. And it's coming to fruition. So you do go, I'm always curious as to what the real motivation behind some of these moves are, because that doesn't make sense to me.
And I'd be interested too, because I think there's a different connotation. So if the overarching thought is like, hey, guys, we know this is going to be a struggle for the next couple of years based on how we're building this team. And Mark and Matt and Brian and Russ and everyone's in it together. And they're saying, hey, we're looking at 2025. We need to be really, really good in 2025. I think you can get by a little bit more maybe with some of this stuff. And it gives maybe Matt a little bit more of a release to be like, okay, my job's not on the line here. If they lose to the Chargers, the Lions, and the Chiefs, they've won one game in 9 weeks, and 1-8 in that stretch. And that one game was against the Brett Rippon-led LA Rams, who is no longer a NFL 53-man quarterback. They released him after the game. So that's a tough look. And I'm sure if you're Matt has to be like, I got to find a way to pick up a win this week, or at least he's coming up. And he's constantly looking at wins this week as like the determining factor. And it maybe doesn't allow you as much time to spend on development or spend on whatever it might be to be. And maybe you even take a look at some different guys and you go with some of the younger players to get them the reps that they need. But instead, he probably has to be like, screw that. I don't have time for that. I need a few wins before the season's done, or my job might be on the line.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. Number one, I thought, okay, you're 3-6. It's like maybe it's start to mix up the defenses, the way you're going about business. Maybe it's time to start checking some things out.
Yeah.
But to your point, this is what happens when in February, all sounds good. And listen, I'm not going to sit here for a second and say like Matt LaFleur thought he was buying himself some time by not having Mercedes Lewis on the team. Like I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is back then, you're sitting around going, okay, this sounds like a good idea. And now in reality, you're like, Jesus, I got to win some games, man. Like I can't. It's not as easy as you think to develop players.
Yeah.
Kyle Shanahan had a really interesting response yesterday to a question. I don't know if you saw it.
I did not.
So a guy said something to the fact that so-and-so's got a quarterback guy that he works with somewhere, one of those quarterback coaches.
I heard parts of this. Yes.
And Shanahan's like, yeah, he's like a strength conditioning guy. Like he's not with us. And he goes, yeah. And so the reporter goes, and I'm paraphrasing this, but he goes, well, he says he's a quarterback developer. Like, in other words, that's his job, right? And Shanahan goes, yeah, that's not what we do. Okay. He can do all that in the offseason. What we're doing, this coaching staff during the week is we're game planning and working on scheme to beat the opponent. We're not working on all that other stuff. And it was interesting because from the perspective of a player, what have I always, like you and I have always talked about, you want two things. You want to be put in a position to be successful and have the tools to find success, right? And what Shanahan is basically saying there is we do the first one. You better figure out the other one on your own because we don't have time. And which is something that I've always talked to you about is like, that's a real problem in the National Football League. And now, and one of the best teams and most well-coached teams in the league, they're saying like, this isn't what the priority is. And so when you have a team that maybe is younger and doesn't have the caliber of staff and doesn't have the caliber of players right now, and they're going after that they're all same tree, same philosophy, you start going, well, why not? Like, why don't you have those guys in the building that can help do these, like, can be super granular and detailed and make these. Look what's happening right now. I know we're getting sideways, man, but like,
no, go for it.
Look what's happening right now with the Detroit Lions. It's like, if you met Dan Campbell, I know Dan, I've worked with Dan, played against Dan, partied with Dan. If you met Dan Campbell, you're not going to you're going to go, Dan's smarter than he's acting. Okay. But you're not going to be like, he's Mike McDaniel smart. You know what I mean? But what Dan did is he goes, I have something I believe in all my heart and I'm really passionate about. And one of those things was, I believe that earlier, Deuce Staley, Mark Brunell, Aaron Glenn, I believe that these people who have gone through the coaching development platform, they're not just walking off the street, except for Brunell, I guess, did a little bit. But these people have something to offer, because not only can we talk X's and O's, we can talk intimate details of confrontation. Of confrontation. And that's going to pay off. And you see the detail that his team execute. Hank Fraley is probably the best example. Hank Fraley might be the best O-line coach in business right now. Yeah. Okay. And you see the detail and that they execute with. It's not like they're just going out there and just literally mauling people. Footwork, hand placement, the way they pick up stunts, everything is better than everybody else. And it's not a coincidence, right? So there's a few groups that are trying to figure this thing out. But by and large, a lot of these teams are kind of where the Green Bay Packers are right now. It's like, we're trying to win a game. We can't necessarily worry about some of the stuff that from maybe the outside looking in, or more importantly, from the locker room looking up, going, dude, we need to get better. Like I need to learn how to get better so I can be better so we can be better.
That's why I think the draft and develop philosophy is getting harder and harder. And I think it's also why you have some of these teams who like we're going to rebuild or whatever. And you start the rebuild and you're the super young team. And then you don't have the coaches that are, again, taking the long-term approach with it. And again, looking 2 years down the road and saying, we got to be really good by this time period and putting that baseline in. And instead, again, because we see coaches get fired after year one in the NFL now. So if you don't see some instant wins and some instant gratification, you could be gone. So coaches immediately have to start looking towards, how can we get a win on Sunday, Monday, Thursday, whenever you're playing? And I don't think can take that same approach of development, which sucks for the NFL. It's a part of the reason I don't think the product on the field is quite as good as it once was. And yeah, it's just disappointing, because I think if there was a little bit more of that approach and maybe a little bit more practice, whatever it might be, I think we'd have better football, and I think we'd have better teams, better players, and better brand every Sunday.
I love Mike McDaniel said something a couple of weeks ago. I find him fascinating, by the way. I find him fascinating. He said something to the effect of I think he just became a father. And he said, how does this play in? And he said, well, it's the same as being a coach. You're a servant. It's a servant role, right? And I think a lot of people in the business forget that, right? Ultimately, a coach, if you're coaching players, you're serving and aiding those people to become their best. That's the goal. The goal is not to hang on to your job. The goal is not to see how much money you can make. The goal is to see how much you can help these other people become the best version of themselves. And I really like the way he said that, but I think that's a really great message that I don't know that everybody subscribes to.
I know everyone doesn't subscribe to that, unfortunately, but yeah, he's a really fun coach, and I continue to root for his success in Miami because he's really fun, a little quirky, but in kind of the best ways. All right, transitioning over, I wanted to talk really quick about Rashan Gary. There's seemingly some frustration in Packerland that Rashan Gary, big new contract, is not getting the big time sack production, the big time explosive plays, the forced fumbles, the fumble recoveries, whatever it might be. That it's great that he's playing quote unquote well, but there's not those big splash plays that you want to see from your premium players. I do not subscribe to that same necessarily take or feel, but I wanted to get your opinion on it as to A, kind of how Rashan's playing, and B, why we might not maybe be seeing some of that ultra crazy, production from Rashan.
Well, when you get a big contract, you get more eyeballs on you. I think that's the first thing. So you're going to get everybody's best. You're probably going to game plan a little bit more than you used to, certainly more than you used to. So that's part of it. I think there's two things. If I was sitting in the room with Rashan, I'd say there's two things that are truth that we have to acknowledge. The first one is you don't have another defensive pass rush threat on this football team. And that's probably the most important one. Preston Smith is a really good defensive end who has 5 sacks this year, but he is not a pass rush specialist at all. And Kenny Clark, if 6 years ago you would decide that Kenny Clark was going to be an all-pro 3 technique penetrating player, I think he could have been, but he's not. And he doesn't have pass rush moves. I mean, the kind that scare me. Okay.
Right, he's a slow burn guy.
Yeah. So you just don't have anybody that so there's only one really point of emphasis for the defense as far as or offense as far as who I'm going to focus on. The other thing is Rashan Gary works incredibly hard, and his hard work has paid off, and he's done really, really great things in the National Football League. If he wants to take the next step and be an absolutely dominant player, given his body profile, given how he likes to rush, given what he's good at, his leverage points, he needs to stop trying to take the high line all the time and get the strip sack fumble. He needs to get to a place where the offensive lineman has in a poor footwork position, poor body alignment, and he needs to be able to flip his hips, bull rush, inside move, Reggie White club. But you need to be able to attack where the quarterback's at, not where you hope he might be if he continues to back up. He wastes, over the past 3 years, he's wasted dozens and dozens of sack opportunities simply because he allows the right tackle to ride him over the top instead of going to the quarterback, pressing the pocket, pressure equals picks, make that quarterback feel that right tackle, or allow the right tackle to keep going upfield. You just go underneath. He doesn't do that yet because he always wants to play really close to the body. And once he ever figures that out, I think you're going to see his sack numbers go way up.
There does seem to be, especially at the beginning of years, where Rashan wants to be a speed rusher. And then at times he'll remember he's a power rusher. And when he starts going through people, you're like, oh, this is incredible. Yep. And you can see him start doing a little bit more. I'm still hoping like the second half of the season is more of Rashan trying to go through people rather than around people. Because to your point, he'll just get kind of worked right around the bend and the quarterback just steps up. I thought you posted a great clip of the TJ Watt sack, and everyone's like, oh, he beat Zach Tom, but it was actually Josh Myers that got beat on the inside. What's that?
I said he didn't beat Zach Tom.
No. So instead, of course, it's the center gets beat, Myers gets beat, and then, of course, the quarterback, doesn't have anywhere to go and so on and so forth. I think that's such a huge part, too, is there's times where I've seen Rashan win, and to your point from earlier, he doesn't have the pressure from the other side to kind of like be in tandem. Number two, because there's not pressure from the other side. Again, Rashan's taking the double team. That there's at least one play this week where I'm pretty sure he was triple teamed at one point. So he's getting a ton of attention. But then also when he does get around, because there isn't necessarily the push from the inside, the quarterback just has the ability to step up, paired with the fact that you have a defense that's allowing a lot of checkdowns and just kind of easy like releases. And then if the quarterback does see Rashan coming, and even if he's there, a lot of times there's a release to get the ball away. I still see Rashan winning at a solid clip. It's just, I don't know what more, other than the things that you just talked about and being a better, pass rusher and kind of figuring out the bull rush thing. I think there's still opportunities there, but just the stuff around him is not exactly going to plan either.
Yeah. And you just talk about rush lane discipline. And this team's failed rush lane discipline multiple times this year. Maybe not anything bigger than that Kenny Pickett 220.
I was going to say, didn't come and haunt them at the end of the game at last.
Yeah, they run a TT, and for whatever reason, Wyatt goes back into the A gap. And I mean, that happens a lot, and that happens a lot in the National Football League. Lane discipline's a real thing, and it's difficult. And we don't know what the rush plan is for a lot of these guys, or if they have a rush plan at all. But you just think sometimes this sport is a very difficult sport to play, but it's relatively simple to figure out. And I think sometimes we like when I'm coaching offensive linemen against guys that want to get real close, like the answer is really simple. Like play with your arms extended. And that sounds stupid because it's so easy, but it literally is that easy. And conversely, if you're Rashan and you always are getting the guy to turn and try to run you upfield, and that left armpit is always available, why are you not taking advantage and throwing him out of the bar? You know what I mean? Like the leverage and body mechanics and everything, just do it. Like do it the most intuitive thing, what a 5-year-old would do, and you're probably right.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Hopefully they can figure some of that stuff out moving forward. Before I let you go, we'll end where we started. Packers, Chargers. Any final takeaways or things that you're going to be watching this week that could end up in it swinging the game one way or the other?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, listen, the Chargers defense we talked about is bad, but they have players, and players can wreck games. Khalil Mack can wreck a game. He did it earlier this year, like 6 sacks in one game. Joey Bosa is one of the best players that I have seen that just doesn't ever have the production that I think he could. But he is incredibly difficult to block when he's on. This is one of the few games, having said all that I think the Packers can run and pass better against their base personnel than anything else. Like I think it's if you could line up with 12, you could put both those rookie tight ends in. Like they've been running those slip blocks where you lead with one and have the other one coming across the ball. You saw it effective last week against Bosa. That's how the Detroit Lions kind of took him out of the game. And you can get those double teams and move those guys all over the field. I think this is the first time in a while the Packers should feel really good. Like, hey, we should win the line of scrimmage this week on the offensive line side of the football. And then, watching Herbert and Allen and Eckler play, all three of them are kind of cheat codes for different reasons. And this could be one of those games where maybe they come up and have a terrible game, and maybe there's the game plan fits out. The thing about the Chargers is it feels like they don't really decide to get, like, Kellen Moore's done a great job and they scheme guys up. When you were talking earlier about Jordan Love's throws, it's like, how many throws, if you watch the Chargers game, they're throwing to like 40 yards of space. Do you remember the Jalen Reed long ball at the end of the game where he didn't really throw it to Jalen? He kind of threw it into space.
Yep.
Right. They throw like 5 of those a game. I mean, it's like they're creating those opportunities, and I mean, they're probably more, but they just don't see them. We don't get a lot of those. And so when you're looking at guys who have one of the most incredible arms I've ever seen, arm talent wise from Herbert, and then these other two guys, I think it's going to be a real tall task to keep these guys under, 25 points. This is going to be one of those kind of games. So the Packers are going to have to break 20 for the first time in a long time in order to win.
This is a different level of talent that they've seen at quarterback all year long. They face Goff, they face Cousins. Mm-hmm. That's probably about it from a top tier or like whatever tier talent we want to discuss. Herbert's going to be a totally different animal. Then they get Goff the following week, followed by Mahomes. So I think we're going to learn a little bit different of exactly where this defense is over the next few weeks. Probably not in a great way, but I am interested to see what kind of game plan they come up with and just to see if they can take anything away. Sometimes those West Coast teams come to a central or area and they don't play well in a noon game. So maybe Green Bay gets a little bit lucky. I do think Green Bay is going to be able to move the ball against the Chargers defense, as you mentioned, but I don't know. This will be an interesting one. Neither team is exactly playing a great brand of football. One should be, I think, much better than the other, but hasn't exactly been that way. I don't know. I'm intrigued, if nothing else.
Big game for Aaron Jones. Make this game about Aaron Jones on offense. 30 touches, an absurd amount of touches. Screen game, one-on-one with the linebackers in base cover, in base defense. As many runs as you can feed him. As long as he can be in the game, keep him in the game. He's just such a difference maker, and especially against this team, he can exploit a lot of things that they do. The other thing is we're getting some bigger plays on offense last week, but in this game, in order to keep up with the Chargers, the Packers have to have a big play offense mentality. And so all those intermediate routes got to hit. You got to hit. You got to give it can't be just sideline go routes, hoping that we catch a couple. Get creative, put things in the middle of the field. Catch and runs, opportunity. Like they miss tackles. They do this team does everything you want from an offensive standpoint as far as their defense. They'll miss tackles. They'll blow coverage. They'll get blown off the line of scrimmage. They won't hit gaps. Like they'll do everything you want. You just got to go take it and be aggressive. Be the aggressors this week.
And I think unlike the past 2 weeks, they have to turn that into point production because they got some explosives and some good drives and some yardage over the past 2 weeks, but left a ton of points on the field due to fumbles, interceptions in the red zone, missed extra points, missed field goal, everything over the past couple of weeks. So they got to capitalize on it as well. Mike, phenomenal stuff as always. Where can we find your incredible work over on Process to Perform, the YouTube channel? Anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, just check out the On My Block podcast. I got a preview out right now for this upcoming game. You can check that on the Process to Perform channel on YouTube. Mike Wahle 68 on Twitter, Process to Perform on Instagram. Hit me up whenever you guys are interested in talking Packers or NFL in general.
Yeah, go subscribe to his YouTube channel. Follow him on social media. You will not regret it. It's phenomenal stuff every single time. Mike, as I mentioned at the onset, I appreciate you a ton. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. We will talk to you in a couple of weeks. Talk about this Packers-Chargers game. Talk about Packers-Lions. Look ahead to Packers-Chiefs by that time. Who knows where this team is at in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Have a good Thanksgiving.
Appreciate it, man. That's going to do it for Mike and I. But until next time, and as always, go Pack, go.